to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Today we are going to discuss a very different topic. This topic is, in a sense, talks about law and Mahabharata and its relevance. And I could say I have one of the best persons to speak on this topic. May I introduce to you Advocate Sridhar Pottaraju, who, in addition to we know that his involvement is there in many important cases at the High Court, at the Supreme Court of India, but he's read 9 volumes of the Mahabharata and, of course, analyzed them and brought out, in a sense, legal anecdotes for all of us, which I think will be a delight to know from him. We did another such topic some time back with Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Mishra. It's been a while, but now we revisit something like this. And I think today is going to be unusual and interesting in that sense, because we are taking analogies from the Mahabharata and applying them to today's life and understanding. So let us take you on a journey, which will indeed be very interesting. Welcome, Advocate Sridhar Pottaraju, and thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure, Tarun, to be on your show, and it's an honor to be on your show. It's such a popular show indeed. And the topic you've chosen is really something which is very close to my heart. So I'd be very happy to share my thoughts on this.
Now, let's get to the first straight question. What is the Supreme Court of India's motto, and where does it come from? I mean, your analysis and explanation of that.
Let me preface this. I had the privilege of working with the legendary Sri K. Parasaran. So I had occasions to hear from him the anecdotes and the source of the motto of Supreme Court and how he would look at interpreting it from the constitutional perspective. So to answer the question, where does Yato Dharmas Tato Jayaha, the motto of Supreme Court, come from? It comes from the Mahabharata. So this is a phrase which actually epitomizes the Indian civilization as a continuing way of life being guided through itihasas. So when we say itihasa, it refers to what has happened on this land that we live in. See, I think undoubtedly we live in the oldest living civilization. I mean, if anyone who's been to any of these places in India, which are actually known for their essence of spiritual energy, take it the Ganga Ghats in Varanasi or any other such places, you find the vibrancy of the energy and the continuity of a living history there. The Harishchandra Ghat, it is being referred to in the Valmiki Ramayana as well. So it's as old as that now. So it's quite an interesting journey for me to explore this space. Being a law student and a researcher, I had this curiosity about tracing the origins. In that sense, I, while reading the Mahabharata, started noting the references to these phrases. And then, thanks to practicing in Supreme Court for more than 2 decades now, I realized that let's figure out where does it come from. And I had the privilege of hearing Chief Justice Deepak Mishra and Sri K. Parasaran exchange in a court as to the source of this, and then it being told that Gandhari actually blesses Duryodhana before the war when he comes seeking blessings from his mother, and he expects that she'll bless him by Vijayi Bhava or victory be yours. But Gandhari is a great woman character in Mahabharata who blesses the son that Yato Dharmas Tato Jayaha. That is, let victory be there where dharma is. So it is overcoming her own maternal affection for her own son, the oldest son. We know that Indian mothers are very affectionate towards son, and more so for the older son, because he has to perform certain things for them in their religious beliefs as well. And she still blesses him only with Yato Dharmas Tato Jaya.
So what does that maxim mean? What does that statement mean?
Yeah. Yato Dharmas Tato Jaya, if you break it down, it would refer to where dharma prevails. That is where the victory eventually will be, because the timeline for victory will have to be measured in a different sense. It cannot be in a shorter period of time, like we experience in our own lifetime. A litigant who enters courts, be it Ramlala or any Ramlal, he takes his own timeline before he reaches its culmination. So that's the patience that is required as an essential part of following the dharma of the yuga, as we would call it. So I would call that you need to follow the dharma of the time, the place, and the space that you occupy. And then you are assured of victory at the end of the journey of pursuing dharma without any doubt in your mind about its efficacy.
Point very well taken. Since we started with the Supreme Court and its motto, it would be only in order to ask you, is there anything on recusal in Mahabharata? Many times recusal does happen. Judges recuse from matters. Lawyers also recuse.
Well, lawyers recuse for different reasons. I mean, they have a choice, and the Bar Council's Code of Ethics also permits them to recuse. And judges do it out of their conscience. Now, but it's very interesting. In the Indian context, if you look at it, the first recusal, the reference to comes in the episode where Draupadi questions people in the assembly, where she's being disrobed by Dushasana after being lost in a wager. There, certain questions are raised by Draupadi, which still are an issue for debate, and even generations and of hundreds of years later, people try to defend it, and then there are questions which are raised. So that is where Bhishma, for the first time, says, when she asks him, Bhishma Pitama, you know Dharma. Can you actually say that what has been done is right or wrong? He says, sorry, you asked Yudhishthira. He's a husband and he knows Dharma. And it is in that context that a reference is drawn where Draupadi cites a conversation between Prahalada, the son of Hiranyakasipa, for whom the Lord Narasimha had taken an avatar. As a king, he was required to adjudicate between his son and another person who come after waging their own lives, saying as to who is superior between them as far as learning is concerned. So Prahalada's first instinct of flight says that, boss, I'll not address this question. I'll recuse. So his priest, he advises him, once you occupy an office of such high position, it's your dharma which will prevail. You do not have a choice of refusing to perform your duty. So you are required to perform the duty without fear or favor. And that's probably the oath that the Constitution also adopts for constitutional offices. So that's where I found that recusal.
This is very interesting. And may I take this forward to ask you that, is there anything in the Mahabharata that will talk about silence or not expressing your view when asked, where you know, but you just choose to keep quiet and not express your view?
Well, not expressing view, again, in the anecdote that I referred to, Bhishma chooses to pass the issue off to Yudhishthira. So that shows silence itself and being a mute spectator. So everyone who was present in that assembly and who were in a position to give a view, and who were all learned, I mean, Dronacharya, Kripacharya. So all of them were learned, and they choose silence as they are asked to address a pertinent question of law, which is raised in the assembly. And that is where they were required to bring out their dharma of answering the question uprightly. And they duck. And that probably explains how they meet their end eventually in the Kurukshetra war.
So I want to ask you that there are many times where you speak of deference to the rule of law, even if the law appears to be unjust. Yeah. If I say in a lighter vein, like the liquor prohibition in Bihar, very unjust law.
Well, it's a perspective. When asked the woman who gets bashed up after 2 pavas by the husband every day.
That's why I said in a lighter vein.
I know.
But there are many other laws which, in a sense, as our Chief Justice of India, Justice N.V. Ramana says, give rise to a lot of unnecessary litigation. But deference to the law, once a law is there, you should be, in a sense, there should be deference to the rule of law. Is there anything on that in the Mahabharata? Will be very interesting to know. That you don't feel it's right, but you defer to it because that is what the law is.
See, Mahabharata times were times when the dharma was the highest virtue. So everyone was measured against his or her dharma. Dharma is absolutely an amazing concept. which does not have any equivalent in any other civilization.
Okay.
So if you look at it from that perspective, the wager results in a Pandavas requiring to go to forests and then staying 1 year in incognito. Now, as soon as they go in, Vanaparva is place where you get a lot of conversations. I mean, the banter that which happens within the 5 siblings, or rather 4 of them with Draupadi, actually blaming Yudhishthira for actually putting them to what plight that he did because of indulging in the game of dice, which is considered a vice. So here, the conversation leads us to a lot of questions. When heard or read in isolation, you feel, yeah, this is the perfect argument. What answer can be there to this? And then when you see the replies which come out from Yudhishthira, he speaks about deference and deference to a dharma that once I have agreed to a particular wager, whether it is right or wrong, I am bound by it. And therefore, in spite of our own strength, I mean, Bhima, Arjuna say that you just stay quiet, we're going to defeat them and regain all our wealth. But he said, but once we have considered that as an obligation, so probably modern day I can refer to this as a contractual obligation. Once you have contracted into something, so as we see, Section 23 public policy is the only thing probably on which an arbitrator also could probably look at it. Otherwise, Section 28 also says that that is the law which governs the party. So there was a contract, and the contract was enforced and honored, though it was considered to be unjust as far as the consequences are concerned.
So I want to know, is there anything on mediation or conciliation in Mahabharata? Anything that talks about that?
In fact, Mahabharata is full of these mediations. In fact, if you look at it, at every stage, there is some attempt of mediation, interlocutory attempts made by wise men. The most prominent of them, you could say, is the interference or the effort made by Lord Sri Krishna when he goes as a representative to the Kuru Sabha to avoid the eventual war which would lead to decimation of the entire Kuru race. And incidentally, that is where he presents his Vishwarupa for the first time, and then everyone is in a complete state of amazement. So here there's an attempt made. I mean, culturally and civilizationally, we are not an adversarial society. When a dispute comes, the disputes are actually resolved by the people within the community, because what happens is certain cultural issues are intermingled in these disputes. So for someone from an alien perspective or alien culture, trying to adjudicate it would actually get more problems. And that's probably what we are seeing now. I mean, most of the disputes which could have been resolved within the family or the smaller group of people who understand the nuances are now being referred to a very unsympathetic adversarial system.
You know what? You've so beautifully put it. I understand it because we will take a break after this, but I understand this because India is such a diverse culture that the culture of Kashmir or Punjab or Haryana is distinct from the culture of Andhra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, but law is same everywhere. So when you put this point beautifully, that conciliation and mediation within the communities lead to disputes being solved at or nipped in the bud. So I mean, you as I understand, you speak of that before even going through the legal process, it gets solved. Absolutely. That is the strength of society in that sense.
Absolutely.
That's a good point. We had Advocate Sridhar Pottaraju explaining to us about mediation in Mahabharata and how it could also lead to lower cases in courts in that sense, because the community is involved in a sense, mediating disputes at the community level, which happens. India is a very diverse society. That's what we discussed. But I'll take this forward and we will speak of whether there is any example of just dissent in the Mahabharata where, people dissent. Could you have any anecdote on that and share this with us?
I think the episode where Draupadi raises this question, Duryodhana's younger brother, Vikarna, he's a very just man. He actually comes out and then, without any iota of doubt, expresses his views, which eventually turn out to be a dissenting view. Because he says that the question there is whether Yudhishthira, having lost himself, could have anything else to wage, much less a legally wedded wife, without the consent of the other brothers. So therefore, when such a legal question is posed, the answer to which comes out brilliantly. He says that once a person has lost his own personal liberty, where is the question of he having any rights over anybody else? So therefore, he has no locus to actually wage Draupadi. So therefore, in the absence of a locus or a capacity, as we could call it the contract sense, the capacity to contract or actually offer something was absolutely not there. And therefore, he says that this entire wager of Draupadi is completely illegal and what we may presently call unconstitutional also.
Very interesting anecdote from you, Mr. Kottaraju, on this. Good to hear this. I want to also know any reference to the rules of punishment in Mahabharata?
Yes, there are quite a few instances. What happens is Mahabharata, Itihasas, I think you would want to understand why we Indians are so descriptive and narrative. And when you come to the point, it would have actually taken 5 minutes. And you would have actually narrated a lot of back descriptive stories. So probably of cultural or civilizational heritage. So when you see Mahabharata, you will have thousands of anecdotes which actually lead one to a particular position. So these anecdotal references actually give you the entire context in which a point is being put across. Now, in that sense, it's multiple anecdotes on how a punishment should be rendered. So it comes probably in a sense where Yudhishthira is actually post-war. He's in a sense of great guilt trip. He's virtually led an army to kill his own kith and kin. And his children are killed, grandchildren are killed. So he's virtually left with no one except his siblings. So he's in a state of what we call a state of mental health challenge or a depression. And he's in a very suicidal frame of mind. And at that stage, the conversations happen, actually talk to him as to what was the need for a just war. Kurukshetra is referred to as a dharmit, where the war is not for wealth or power, and then unjustness is defeated. So therefore they justify, as a king, you are bound to use a rod of punishment against those who are unjust. And as a consequence, what has happened was supposed to happen, and that is your dharma as a king. So therefore, you don't have to feel sad or remorse about it, because that was your duty as a king. So that's how they come about. And there are other instances also where they speak about the proportion of punishment. So if it is a first-time offender, how is he to be punished? So, that classically refers to I thought about the Probation of Offenders Act. How often have we used it? So many of the cases like matrimonial offenses or all civil offenses, primarily now legally made criminal offenses. So why don't even we use the Probation of Offenders Act? Because the Dharma rule says a person who's not committed an offense out of an intent to commit an offense, but out of circumstances which were out of his control or under duress or unknowingly or unwittingly or error of judgment should be condoned. But a person, if he commits a smaller offense also, but with an intent, then the punishment will have to be proportionately higher. So there are very many instances like this which set out the rules of punishment and why it is required.
Point very well taken. I move on to another issue. In India today, there is a lot of discussion on river pollution, air pollution, groundwater pollution. So in that context, could you share with us what the Mahabharata says on the environment and protecting the environment? Is there anything on that?
Sure. In fact, the Pandavas, while in the forest, they spent more than a decade in forest. So they perform their rituals there, and so they go hunting. So while they go hunting, there is an interdict that Yudhishthira gives that after a point, I think we should move on. Otherwise, we will actually deplete the wildlife in this place. So that's a consciousness about the environment. And then moving forward, there were a couple of instances where I read this. It's quite amazing. Vidura refers to Pandavas and Kauravas as forest and tigers, while trying to persuade Dhritarashtra that you should avoid a dispute in their cousins and then somehow reconcile them. There he says that a forest without tigers or tigers without forests don't exist. And look at the Project Tiger. Tiger is at the top of the food chain. And then that is said in such a subtle referral manner. And so much of knowledge would have been available with the author. Of course, Vedavyas would have been probably what we would have called him as a top-class professor of his times in philosophy.
Because we take this to another issue of the administrative law. Anything to do with administrative law in that epic?
Oh, this, in fact, the reason I started reading Mahabharata was because I wanted to equip myself with understanding of life and also understanding of law, for which you need a lot of philosophical foundation. And then legal principles would be emerging only if you have a philosophical understanding towards life. That's my personal views. So I was somehow of some kind of understanding that Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva are the master class where Bhishma teaches these things to the Pandavas. So to reach there, you need to prepare. The preparatory was the previous Parvas. So when we reached there, that's the largest Parva. Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva are the largest Parvas in the Mahabharata. They actually expound administrative law, how a king should run his administration, how he is to maintain his armies, how he is to conquer his enemies, how he make truce with hostile neighbors. And he also explains the need for being detached, though exercising power, the spiritual aspects also. All of them are beautifully blended. And then he teaches him the administrative law, because Yudhishthira tries to take the clan forward. That's the classic lessons. And if you read Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva, you wouldn't get a better treatise on administrative law.
I want to ask you, there is a lot of reference to Lakshman Rekha by judges in judgments and their comments also. Do you think the legal system has explored the epics like Mahabharata? Has that happened? Because when you said that the motto of Supreme Court is itself from the Mahabharata, so that's why I asked.
See, if you look at the Constitution, the original Constitution was quite unapologetic, if I might say, referring to our civilizational heritage, because that is what we are. There's
the original Constitution, you mean the handwritten?
Yeah, it's a handwritten one, the illustrations. I think I'm surprised that I did not get to see it till probably more than spending a decade in my profession. And the then senior counsel, who's now a judge in the Supreme Court, had a copy of it. And when I'd gone to brief along with another senior who's also now on the bench, he had actually shown it to us. And I was so awestruck to see the Constitution with these illustrations, the signatures of the members of the Constituent Assembly. And this is part of the Constitution.
In fact, this copy of the Constitution of India, every law student should get.
I was surprised that it was not there in my Delhi University campus. I never got to see it. I'm surprised. Come to Delhi, considered to be the Asia's premier law school. I came all the
original copy, a copy of that was not there.
No, it was not even referred to, so I didn't know it existed.
This is very interesting to know. I think the government is looking into it. The original, the way it was intended, but reprint of it should be available.
The Kindle edition should be made available. What's the big copyright about it?
That's a good point. But do you think Indians as such are looking at the Mahabharata beyond its religious context? Do you think is that happening?
I actually failed to see what is the religious aspect of Mahabharata. You have a woman getting disrobed. You have a war where everyone gets killed. It is a itihasa.
It's a history of this land is what you see.
Absolutely. It is the history of this land. So there is no liking or disliking. It is what it is. It's as simple as that.
But do you think it is being looked at beyond its religious concept? Is that happening?
See, if you look at it from 1950 onwards, after we adopted the constitution with the original illustrations, most of the judgments actually had the flair of these dharma shastras or the quotations from the Mahabharata or the other epics.
These judges were taught it in the colleges.
Judges, no, they were rooted in our civilization. It's not about taught. Nobody goes to learn these things. Like these are all stories or learning which happens at home in your community. So that's a natural learning process for everyone in that times. And then they were all familiar with Sanskrit. So that gave them the advantage of reading the originals. See, for me, I've been deprived access to Sanskrit. And I'll tell you the small anecdote that when I took humanities after 10th, more for fear of science and maths than love for humanities. So I'd actually asked for Sanskrit as a subject. It was offered and for everyone in the 11th. But the principal of my, we call it the college, said that, no, sorry, this is only meant for the maths and biology students because they have entrance exams to write. So they can't spare much time on languages. So we will not give it to humanities students. So therefore, some kind of a racism I experienced when I wanted to learn a language, I was denied. So, and I've never learned Sanskrit thereafter. I keep struggling, but it seems to be evasive. So, but coming back to your point on Sanskrit and the Mahabharata, what I've noticed is that the earlier period of judgments till 70s and sometimes in 80s also you find these slokas coming in because the bar and the bench were equipped with this knowledge. And they were
so you mean that knowledge they have been weaned off that knowledge, the younger generations?
Absolutely. I think, we all agree that post-emergency, if I can metaphorically call, we've chosen to have a left-hand drive on a road which is British. So we're confused. So we really don't know what we are doing.
I think this statement of yours will be remembered for times to come. But we would like to do one more episode on this topic. This has been a very interesting conversation with you, Mr. Pottaraju. And for you viewers also, this is a different take on what we do generally. Mahabharata and law is a very different topic, which you all got to see today. Hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Mr. Pottaraju for taking out time for sharing this with all the viewers. Thank you so much for joining us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.